Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon again. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We are going back to that horrible world known as JRC, but first, I apologize for my appearance. I am well aware that I'm not at my fanciest right now. And to be honest, folks, it's because putting on makeup for me is like a 2 to 3 hour drawn out thing. It takes way too much time, which is why, unless I'm going on somebody else's channel, I don't put much effort into it. It's just over exhausting. And considering the content and some of the things that we go over, it's just easier overall. But still, I do not look great today, so I apologize about that. Before we go off and take another left turn, to the disclaimers. When we discuss places like the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center or Agape Boarding School for Boys, you're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips of surveillance footage of people with mental health issues and disabled people being tortured and abused. If you got young children present, please use your headphones. This channel is marked not for kids for very obvious reasons. We very obviously use profanity and speak on dark subjects. If your child is 16 and younger and watching, parental supervision is advised. In regards to the Stop the Shocks campaign, or the campaign against the troubled teen industry, which these days have pretty much morphed into one singular giant movement, considering it's the same model being used both on developmentally disabled as well as those tough love schools, and don't even get me started on those camps. We've kind of all melded together at this point. You'll find pertinent links in there. Neuroclastic's article is in there. Their GoFundMe is in there. Autistic massive archive, where we literally get the bulk of our material from in regards to not just this channel, but pretty much everybody who speaks on this topic, as well as the abuses in regards to ABA. So please take a look at that link as well, all right? Now, we went a little bit into the paragraph last night, and I had to read the full thing. 'Cause I like to give context. And if you remember, we were rehashing once again how JRC never seems to take any responsibility in regards to the fallout of when kids get transferred into other residential programs. What they do is, because the kids do regress, because there are now added additional issues and new psychological diagnoses to be paired along with the behavioral troubles that they already had, the JRC usually uses that as a means to say, see, now they weren't doing that when they had our device on them and you took it off of them and it's your fault. No, JRC. No. When you're dealing with kids who have been abused, neurotypical or neurodivergent, whenever they are brought out of the dangerous situation and are finally in a safe space, guess what generally happens? Down the road, or in some cases, almost immediately. There are deep, troubling psychological and behavioral repercussions that do come and manifest themselves out in our behavior because of the years on end of abuse, as well as the extreme psychological damage that comes from suppressing all of that shit for years. There is a toll when you suppress anything for too long. Neurotypical, neurodivergent, it doesn't matter. There is always a cost. It comes out. Now, let's take the neurotypical situation. We used this hypothetical yesterday so that you can understand how insane and completely false and horrifying the JRC's counter argument to this is. So, say, instead of discussing the JRC, we are discussing a neurotypical child who's getting horrifically beaten at home. A school official notices this and notifies the state as a mandated reporter. The kid is removed from the violent household and is to be kept safe and far away from the parents that was causing them harm. Now that the kid has been removed from that environment, you might see some behaviors, some acting out that comes with processing the horror you just came through. Now, when those behaviors happen, when that child has been knowingly abused and got out of the situation, those kids do tend to sometimes act out and have behaviors that are a little bit terrifying. We've all heard the stories, okay? We've all heard the stories. Now, if a state worker came forward and they're seeing this kid is having a reaction to what happened to them, they are acting out. Which happens when you suppress shit for that long due to survival. Believe me, I would know this giant chip on my shoulder and anger management issues didn't come from nowhere. Just saying. Do you think in that case, when they start displaying those behaviors as a byproduct to the horrific abuse that they survived, if someone mentioned, well, they didn't have those behaviors when they were with their abusive parent, maybe they knew what was really best. So I think what we need to do is put them back with their parents. No. Nobody fucking says that. At all. It is pretty well understood within the field of mental health, the caseworkers, the social workers, everybody within that field understands that there is a high potential for the kid to act out some of that anger, rage, sadness, depression, and PTSD because they survived some extremely traumatic shit. They understand that this is a byproduct of surviving abuse. Now, what's going on with these JRC kids who are being systematically starved, shocked by a horrific, barbaric device that is designed to hurt and feel like it's burning them? A device that we know has caused second and third degree burns among all the other things it complicates. So we have sleep deprivation, we have the bizarre behavioral rehearsal lessons where if they think it's a rare behavior, they will actually deliberately trigger that said behavior. And remember how it works, kids, because if they try to trigger it and the kid doesn't give in to the trigger, they get punished. If they give in to the trigger, then they're punished so that they can learn that it's wrong. Okay? Now, us in a logical, real world can understand that once you are moved out as a kid out of that kind of horrific environment, we understand that more than likely, due to the trauma that they were forced to experience, there is probably going to be an uptick in some very scary, both self-injurious as well as aggressive behaviors, just the same as it would be for a neurotypical child survivor of child abuse. It's the same reaction for the same reasons. So why is the JRC allowed to argue that because these kids are having very understandable and very well documented in multiple cases reactions and manifestations of behavior that comes out of processing this traumatic shit you just experienced? Why does the JRC get to argue with not a single goddamn challenge from anyone that obviously the reason why the behaviors got worse and intensified was because they were no longer being tortured? And that the answer is that poor kid should get sent back into that hellhole and strapped up back up to that torture device, instead of making the JRC own up to the damage they caused and the consequences that not them, not our parents, not the direct care staff have to pay, but that we have to pay. Why is there a double standard here? How can we, in one situation, understand that there is probably going to be outbursts and different types of difficult behaviors that are going to come out from a kid that has just been saved from and lived through child abuse? But those of us with developmental disabilities who are stuck in hellholes like this are not allowed that same level of understanding, even though at the very base of it, it's the same situation. That really is a question I would really love answered. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? You wouldn't send a child abuse survivor back to the abusive parent because they had behaviors manifest while they're trying to process through the trauma they experienced. Why are we doing that to disabled people? And not just doing it, but also telling them that it's their own fault. Because that's some monstrous evil shit. Sorry, folks, you know me on this channel. I call it like I see it. Alright, I've ranted enough, at least for now. We're going to go on to the next sentence. So, he would attack the Melmark staff and hit his own head against walls. EL was admitted to the emergency room on multiple occasions because of self-injury, dehydration, and his refusal to eat. To round it all out here, let's return to my story once again. as well as the hypothetical I'm putting before you. If every reaction behavior I was reading right now was not coming from a JRC very poorly done character assassinating, victim blaming bullshit, but instead you were reading the report, paperwork, if you will, of a child who is currently undergoing therapy that was a survivor of childhood abuse. If you read through this, it's the same signs, isn't it? I recognize all of them because it happened to me through my stepbrother. I know I've gone over these before, but just to kind of tie it all together here, I became more violent because I lived on edge with hyper level paranoid vigilance for years on end. When you go through that, especially in your very, very formative years, it takes a long goddamn time to be able to determine the difference between the people who are trying to harm you and the people who are actually trying to help you. That was a good 2 to 3 years where my trauma manifested to where I couldn't be around people. This is going to make me sound like a horrible person, disclaimer, but my stepbrother when I was a kid had red hair. My PTSD, I would see that. If it was a direct care or somebody trying to help me, I'd flinch and try to run. Or I would attack. Okay? Let's see here. What else? But what about the self-abuse tip? Oh, yes. Not only did I do the self-abuse while the other abuse was happening, that continued afterward. Because remember, I told you all that deeply implanted self-loathing that I was dealing with. And the way that my head and my own thoughts turned against me as my worst enemy, that was telling me that that was what I deserved. And that self-hatred turns inward. And I'm sorry, still kind of slightly, although not as much as I used to be, ashamed to say, I would then turn that hatred into myself physically. Whether it was trying to take too many pills, whether it was, like I told you guys, with the knives washing dishes, whether it was punching myself specifically in the jaw, in the cheek, dragging nails across my forehead, dragging my nails into my skull, full body slabs with no attempts to cushion my fall to the floor multiple times. Yeah. Yeah. And guess what? That was manifestations of having been someone who survived horrible things. That's why there's therapy. That's why the entirety of my treatment program is not solely based around the fact that I'm autistic. It is based around me as an individual, and it is in a singular, cohesive plan that has to do with nobody else in regards to treatment but myself. That includes the post-traumatic stress disorder, includes autism, includes the anxiety disorder, it includes the clinical depression. And yes, even the physical disabilities that have caught up with me, such as the one I finally have an actual name for, the apparently serotonin syndrome that came directly from taking two of the wrong medicines at the same time of day at the same time when I was in high school, which causes what can be extremely debilitating spasms that are in my legs, or the smaller ones, which don't really affect my legs all that much. They still hurt, and it gives my legs, especially around my kneecaps, a very weird hollow feeling that I can feel constantly. They're always kind of off heat, they never really feel warm. It's weird. But I can still walk. I can still exercise the hell out of them. I can still build muscle with them. They just twitch, and it becomes extremely painful when any major snow or ice storm comes upon me. That's when it travels up into my spine, my shoulders, my hands, my fingers. Those really suck. But you get my point, right? These are the actions of someone who has survived extremely traumatic childhoods. We should not be looking at these two separate situations and judging them differently from one another. If you understand that a neurotypical child who has survived traumatic child abuse is probably going to act out. They're going to have behavior issues. They're going to be more susceptible to things down the line, such as alcohol or drug addiction, because it comes with the territory. But then you look at us neurodivergent folks and us having the exact same human reactions to the same level of traumatic shit. And we get blamed for those behaviors instead of the people who inflicted that trauma upon us. And therefore, we are supposed to buy the argument that the answer is essentially to send us back to our abuser. If it doesn't make sense for the neurotypical child situation, it doesn't make sense. Period. Period. These are the reactions of those of us who've gone through horrific abuse. The answer is to not then inflict more abuse as though that it's going to correct the reaction. That is madness, people. It's absolute madness. We're going to go ahead and close on that. We don't get very many views on this channel. The few we do tend to get removed from time to time. Please, folks, if you could, don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe, Don't forget to hit the comments. We got a storm coming in, and my stuffed nose is like causing me special level sensory issues that makes me irritated at literally air. So I'm going to go get some thyme extract and inject a little bit more into my little makeshift Gatorade bottle here. I appreciate your time, folks. As always, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. I'll see you here in a few. Bye-bye, everyone.